Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into the world of AI regulation,
Oh, yeah.
specifically the EU's AI Act.
Okay.
This legislation is making waves because it's the first of its kind and could easily set the standard for how AI is governed globally.
Right.
So we've got a stack of articles and research to break down for you,
Okay.
and we're going to tackle it from two angles.
Okay.
First, we'll give you the need-to-know basics
Sure.
of what's actually in the Act.
Right.
Then we'll explore why this matters to you,
Okay.
even if you don't work in tech or live in Europe.
Yeah.
Trust me, the ripple effects of this are far-reaching.
Right.
And get this,
Yeah.
parts of the EU's AI Act actually came into force earlier this year,
Yeah, wow.
on August 1st, 2024.
Okay.
So this isn't some sci-fi future scenario. It's
Yeah.
happening right now.
Wow. That's pretty.
Okay, let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is AI,
Yeah.
according to the EU?
Um.
Their definition is surprisingly broad, and it goes way beyond just the robots and self-driving cars you might picture.
Right. Yeah. Like the Terminator and stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
So what is it?
What is AI according to the EU? They are casting a very wide net with this definition.
Okay.
They're including things you probably interact with every day
Right.
without even realizing it's AI.
Okay.
Think about those personalized recommendations you get on
Yeah.
Spotify or Netflix, or even those chatbots that pop up on websites.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all considered AI systems under this new legislation.
Whoa. I never really thought about those things as AI before.
Yeah,
I guess it really is all around us.
it really is.
So why is it so important to have a clear definition like this?
Well, it lays the groundwork for understanding what's actually being regulated.
Okay.
We're not just talking about cutting-edge research labs here.
Right.
We're talking about ensuring responsible use of AI in all its forms, even the seemingly mundane ones that have become part of our daily lives.
Okay, so now that we know what we're dealing with,
Yes.
let's get into how the EU is actually approaching regulation.
Sure.
They've adopted what they call a risk-based approach,
Okay.
which basically means different levels of AI get different levels of scrutiny.
Okay.
So tell me about that.
Precisely. They've grouped AI applications into 4 categories.
Okay.
Unacceptable risk,
Mm.
high risk,
Okay.
limited risk,
Mm.
and minimal risk.
Okay.
This way, they can tailor regulations to the specific potential harms of each type of AI.
Mm.
It's a pretty clever system because it aims to protect people without stifling innovation.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's start with the most extreme category.
Okay.
What falls under unacceptable risk, and what happens to those AIs?
Unacceptable risk AIs are basically straight up banned in the EU.
Okay.
These are systems deemed too dangerous
Right.
or ethically problematic to be used at all.
Okay.
And some of the examples might surprise you.
You do tell me.
Well, imagine a government using AI to create a social scoring system
Uh-huh.
that determines your access to services or your ability to travel.
Yeah,
Sounds a bit like a Black Mirror episode, right?
totally. I definitely wouldn't want to live in a world like that.
And the EU agrees.
Oh, good.
They've explicitly banned this type of AI-powered social control.
Wow.
They're also prohibiting systems that exploit vulnerabilities of specific groups
Uh-huh.
or use real-time biometric identification in public spaces for law enforcement purposes.
Mm.
They're drawing a firm line in the sand when it comes to AI that could be used for mass surveillance or discrimination.
Wow. I'm really impressed by how seriously they're taking the ethical implications of this technology.
Yeah.
It seems like they're really thinking about the potential harms before they become a reality.
Right. They're trying to get ahead of it.
Okay, so we've seen what's strictly off limits.
Yeah.
Now let's step into the gray areas,
Yeah.
where AI gets really powerful, but also potentially risky. What can you tell us about the high-risk category?
This category is broad because it includes AI used in a lot of critical sectors.
Okay.
Healthcare, transportation,
Okay.
energy, law enforcement,
Yeah.
and even things like recruitment and loan applications.
Okay.
It's not that these AI systems are inherently bad,
Right.
but they have the potential to impact people's lives in significant ways.
So what does the EU want to see happen with these high-risk AIs?
They're essentially saying, if you're going to use AI in these high-stakes domains, you need to show us that it's safe, fair, and accountable.
Okay.
They want rigorous testing and clear documentation to prove that the systems are working as intended and not discriminating against anyone.
That makes sense. But how do they measure something as subjective as fairness?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
That seems really tricky.
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of one of the biggest challenges with AI regulation.
Okay.
The Act provides guidelines and criteria for assessing fairness,
Mm-hmm.
but it's an ongoing discussion and will likely involve a lot of case-by-case evaluation as these technologies evolve.
So it's not as simple as just checking a box.
Right.
This is where things start to get really nuanced.
Exactly. And there's one specific area within high-risk AI that's getting a lot of attention.
Okay.
Profiling.
Profiling. What exactly does that mean in the context of AI?
Imagine applying for a loan and an AI based on your online shopping habits denies you because it predicts you're irresponsible with money.
Oh, wow.
That's the type of profiling the EU wants to scrutinize.
That's wild. It feels like a slippery slope.
Any AI system that automatically categorizes people based on their personal data falls into this high-risk territory. It doesn't matter if it's used for targeted advertising risk assessments or anything else.
Right.
The EU is taking a strong stance on this because they're concerned about AI amplifying existing biases or creating new forms of discrimination.
So they're basically trying to get ahead of the problem before it spirals out of control.
Precisely. And it will be interesting to see how companies navigate these new requirements.
Yeah.
Especially given the complexity of some of these AI systems.
Okay, so we've covered the AIs that are banned and those that are under heavy scrutiny.
Right.
What about the less risky stuff?
Well, that's where the limited risk category comes in.
Okay.
This is where we start to see examples that you're probably more familiar with in your daily life.
Okay.
Things like chatbots, emotion recognition software,
Okay.
and even deepfakes.
Deepfakes, and now that's something I've definitely heard of.
Yeah.
Seems like everyone's talking about those these days.
They're certainly getting a lot of attention, and for good reason.
Yeah.
But in terms of the AI Act, the focus here isn't on banning them.
Yeah.
It's about transparency.
Transparency. So like making sure people know they're interacting with a deepfake and not a real video.
Exactly. The AI Act requires that people are clearly informed when they're interacting with or being analyzed by these types of AI systems.
Okay.
Whether it's a chatbot pretending to be human or a deepfake video that's been manipulated, it's all about informed consent.
You know, this whole thing about chatbots pretending to be human reminds me of the time I spent like 20 minutes arguing with a customer service bot before realizing it wasn't a real person. I was so frustrated.
I think a lot of people have had experiences like that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why this transparency requirement is so important.
Right.
It allows people to make informed decisions about how they want to interact with AI.
I'm curious, how do you think this will change our interactions with AI?
Oh, that's interesting.
Will we be more cautious
Yeah.
or suspicious if we know we're not dealing with a real person?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
It definitely raises some interesting considerations about how we perceive and relate to AI. It's possible that increased transparency could lead to more trust in the long run,
Right.
but it could also make us more wary of these technologies.
It's definitely something to think about, and it highlights just how complex these issues are becoming. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the social and ethical implications as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered the AIs that are banned, those that are heavily regulated,
Right.
and those that require more transparency.
Okay.
What's left?
Well, we have the minimal risk category, which includes things like spam filters or video game AI.
Oh.
These are systems that pose little to no risk to people's safety or fundamental rights.
Right.
So they have minimal obligations under the Act.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I've heard there's a new category that's emerging as a bit of a wild card.
Oh, really?
General Purpose AI Models, or GPAI.
Oh, okay.
That's where things get really interesting.
All right, tell me about it.
So we're talking about models like ChatGPT, which are incredibly versatile and capable of performing a vast range of tasks.
Okay.
They can generate text, translate languages, write different kinds of creative content, and even answer your questions in a surprisingly human-like way. Okay, so this is definitely more advanced than your average chatbot.
Right.
What makes these GPAIs so challenging to regulate?
Well, because they are so versatile and can be used for so many different purposes.
Yeah.
It's difficult to predict all the potential use cases and risks in advance.
Right.
It's like regulating a Swiss Army knife.
Oh, okay.
It's a tool that can be used for good or bad depending on the intent of the person using it.
So how is the EU tackling this challenge.
Right.
Surely they're not just letting these powerful AIs run wild.
Of course not. The EU AI Act is the first major legislation to grapple with this kind of AI head-on.
Okay.
And while it doesn't ban GPAI outright,
Right.
it does impose stricter requirements on the companies that develop and deploy these models.
All right, let's dive into that.
Sure.
What are those requirements?
GPAI providers need to be extra diligent about documenting their models, assessing potential risks, and being transparent about how their models work and what data they were trained on.
So they're basically saying with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. The EU wants to ensure that these powerful AIs are being developed and used responsibly, and they're putting the onus on the companies to demonstrate that they're taking the necessary precautions.
This is all so fascinating.
Yeah.
But I have to admit, my head is starting to spin a bit.
I can imagine.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick breather.
Okay.
And then come back to talk about the timelines for implementation.
Right.
And what happens if someone breaks the rules.
Okay.
Because that's where the rubber really hits the road.
Right. So are we ready to jump back into this AI Act?
Yeah, let's get back into it. I'm eager to hear about how all these rules are actually going to be put into practice.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have a law on paper, but it's another thing entirely to enforce it in the real world.
Absolutely. And the EU is taking a strategic approach with a fast implementation timeline.
Okay.
They recognize that regulating something as complex and fast-moving as AI can't happen overnight.
So it's not like flipping a switch and everything changes instantly.
Exactly. Some parts of the Act, like those high-risk elements we discussed earlier, actually came into effect back on August 1st of this year.
Oh, wow.
But other parts are rolling out gradually in 2025 and 2026.
That makes sense. It gives companies time to adjust and figure out how to comply with these new regulations. But what happens if they don't? What are the consequences for breaking the rules?
Well, let's just say the EU isn't messing around.
Okay.
The penalties can be pretty hefty. We're talking millions of euros in fines for companies that don't comply.
Ouch. That's a serious incentive to get your AI house in order.
Yeah.
But here's something I've been wondering about. This whole act is coming from the EU.
Right.
But does it only apply to companies within the EU?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What about companies in other parts of the world like the US or China?
That's where things get really interesting. The EU AI Act has what's called extraterritoriality.
Extraterritoriality. That sounds intense. Break it down for us.
Think of it this way. Even if your company is based in Silicon Valley, if your AI system is used by people in the EU, you still have to play by their rules.
Wow, so the EU is really asserting its influence on the global stage when it comes to AI. I'm curious, do you think this could spark a global race to set AI standards? Or will we end up with a patchwork of different approaches around the world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a bit like the Wild West out there right now, with everyone trying to figure out the best way to govern this incredibly powerful technology.
Yeah.
The EU has definitely thrown down the gauntlet with the AI Act, and it will be fascinating to see how other countries respond.
It's definitely a high-stakes game we're talking about, shaping the future of AI, not just in Europe, but potentially worldwide.
Exactly. Getting AI regulation right is crucial, not just for protecting individuals from potential harms, but also for fostering innovation and ensuring that AI is used for good. It's a delicate balancing act.
Okay, let's take a step back and recap what we've learned so far. The EU AI Act is a groundbreaking piece of legislation that takes a risk-based approach to regulating AI. It categorizes AI systems based on their potential for harm.
Right.
Banning some outright, placing strict requirements on others, and requiring transparency for those that pose limited risk.
And importantly, the act has teeth. It comes with serious penalties for companies that don't comply. We also discussed the global reach of the act. It can apply to companies outside the EU if their AI impacts individuals within the EU.
This is heavy stuff. It feels like we're witnessing a major turning point in the history of AI.
I think you're right. The EU AI Act has the potential to reshape the entire AI landscape. It's a bold move, and it will be fascinating to see how it plays out in the years to come.
So for our listeners out there who are feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information, what's the key takeaway? What's the one thing they should remember from this deep dive?
AI is being regulated. It's happening now, and the EU is leading the charge, whether you're an AI developer, a business leader, or just someone who uses AI in your daily life. This is something you need to be aware of.
I completely agree. This isn't just an abstract concept anymore. It's having real-world implications, and it's only going to become more important in the future.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But don't worry, we'll be back soon to explore some of the bigger questions and potential future scenarios surrounding the EU AI Act. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring the EU's AI Act,
Right.
a landmark piece of legislation.
Yeah.
That's setting the stage for how AI is governed around the world. We've covered the nitty-gritty details,
Right.
the risk categories,
Yeah.
and even the potential global impact.
Right.
But now it's time to step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
So we've established that AI is being regulated.
Right.
And that the EU is leading the way.
Yeah.
But what does it all mean?
Yeah.
Why should our listeners care about this?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Even if they're not AI experts or living in Europe.
Well, for starters, AI is no longer just a futuristic concept.
Right.
It's deeply embedded in our lives, even if we don't always realize it.
Right.
From the algorithms that curate our social media feeds to the AI-powered tools used in healthcare and finance. These technologies are shaping our experiences and influencing our decisions in profound ways.
Yeah. And as AI becomes even more powerful and pervasive, it's crucial to have safeguards in place to ensure it's being used responsibly and ethically.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where the EU AI Act comes in.
Exactly. The Act is a bold attempt to grapple with the complex challenges posed by AI.
Right.
And to set a precedent for other countries to follow. It's about protecting individuals from potential harms like discrimination bias and surveillance, while also fostering innovation and ensuring that AI benefits society as a whole.
But as we discussed earlier, it's not a simple solution.
No.
There are a lot of gray areas and unanswered questions.
Yeah, like how do we define fairness in the context of AI?
Right, exactly.
How do we balance the need for regulation with the desire to avoid stifling innovation?
Right.
These are questions that will continue to be debated for years to come.
So what can our listeners do to stay informed and participate in this ongoing discussion?
We'll keep listening to podcasts like this one.
Of course.
You know, we're committed to bringing you in-depth analysis and diverse perspectives on the latest developments in AI. We'll be continuing to cover the EU AI Act as it's implemented.
Right.
And exploring its global impact.
And of course, we've included links to more information in our show notes.
Yes.
So be sure to check those out if you want to dive even deeper into the details.
But beyond that, I encourage everyone to just stay curious.
Yeah.
And engage with the world around them.
Right.
Pay attention to how AI is being used in your daily life. Ask questions about how these technologies work and who they're serving. The more we understand about AI, the better equipped we'll be to shape its future.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the EU AI Act.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a fascinating journey, and we hope you've learned something new along the way. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.